Now to Kern County's weed wars, and a report from the cannabis industry research firm BDS Analytics estimates sales of cannabis in California will hit $3.7 billion in 2018 alone, and predict that number will increase to $5.1 billion in 2019 as more dispensaries come online. Last October's decision by the Kern County Board of Supervisors to ban the retail marijuana industry was a high-stakes vote in more ways than one. It was a 4-to-1 vote, with 5th District Supervisor Leticia Perez the lone dissenter. She favored regulating the industry and the new revenue stream it represented for the county. But critics contend the board's vote should have been a 4-0 vote with 1 abstention. Some stakeholders within the cannabis community believe Perez should have abstained because she had a serious conflict of interest, a husband who was actively lobbying for cannabis clients. 17 News has learned that Perez's husband, Fernando Jara, in the run-up to the big vote, was very active on the local level, lobbying and consulting for cannabis stakeholders. We asked the question of County Council Mark Nations last month. Did Supervisor Leticia Perez have a conflict of interest in voting on whether to ban commercial marijuana businesses in Kern, given that her husband was consulting for cannabis clients? Nations says Perez herself broached the subject before the vote, but he concluded there was no conflict.
He was functioning as a consultant. He was retained by somebody, but none of his activities pertained, as I understood it, to anything in Kern County.
But 17 News has learned that wasn't the case. We know of at least 5 occasions where Fernando Jara and his associates met with county officials and others about pot policy. Jeff Flores is chief of staff for Supervisor Mike Maggard, and he met in March of 2017 with Jara and dispensary owner David Abbasi.
Briefed me on marijuana. As Mike's principal land use advisor, I would take meetings on any land use issues before the board.
Flores was also present for another meeting, this one in Perez's office in April of 2017, with Jara and representatives for Industrial Partners, a big Southland cannabis enterprise, talking land use regulations for cultivation and warehousing of marijuana.
As a supervisor herself, with her husband, Fernando Jara, and his clients at that time, Industrial Partners Group, Steph Smith, Martin Smith, and their attorney, Ben Eilenberg.
Supervisor David Couch's chief of staff, Brandon Martin, declined our request for an on-camera interview, but he did confirm that in the summer of 2017, he attended a meeting at Seven Oaks Country Club at the request of Fernando Jara and local marijuana advocate T.J. Esposito. In a statement to 17 News, Martin said, Fernando Jara told me he was working with people active in the cannabis industry in the Humboldt area who would like to meet with Supervisor Couch and discuss cannabis regulation. Then there were the numerous emails between Jara and County Planning Director Lorelei Oviatt in July and August of 2017. Jara asking for a meeting on behalf of his clients, Industrial Partners, to discuss the Cannabis Environmental Impact Report Oviatt had prepared. Cannabis advocate David Abbasi, who represents Central Valley Cannabis, in several emails to local stakeholder groups, he refers to Fernando Jara as his group's consultant. And local businessman Stan Ellis confirms that he had 3 meetings with Fernando Jara and David Abbasi. In a statement to 17 News, Ellis said Ben Eilenberg, representing Southland cannabis stakeholders, was also in attendance, and Ellis was asked to lease one of his buildings to warehouse, cultivate, and dispense cannabis. At one point, offered $10,000 in cash as a down payment to seal the deal. Ellis immediately declined the offer. So the question stands, given the activities of her husband on the local level, did Supervisor Perez have a conflict of interest in casting a vote on the cannabis ban in Kern County?
She absolutely should have abstained from the vote. Now that all of this has come out, I'm just disappointed.
We went back to Mark Nations today with that question and with what we've learned.
I can't say. I would have to take a look at the information that you have, some of which I have seen, as I mentioned, some of it's contained in the documents. I'm not familiar with the last one you mentioned, but I would have to look at that in the context of the Political Reform Act and evaluate it in that context. I can't sit here and tell you it would change anything.
District Attorney Lisa Green confirmed over the phone today her public integrity unit is investigating allegations of wrongdoing involving the supervisors and is not limiting her investigation. We reached out to both Supervisor Perez and her husband Fernando Jara today for interviews on this story. The office of Supervisor Perez says she could not or would not comment because County Counsel Mark Nations advised her not to give any additional information on the matter. Mr. Nations would not comment on privileged communications with Supervisor Perez. And after a repeated request for an interview, Fernando Jara wrote in a text, quote, "As I said before, I am not involved in the current circus acts being paraded in the media. I wish Supervisor Maggard the best in this political mess of his," end quote. Topping our news this hour, after months of questions about a potential conflict of interest surrounding Supervisor Leticia Perez's pro-marijuana vote last fall, today Perez announced she will no longer vote on marijuana issues in Kern County. 17 News has been following this story for the better part of a year, and our Danny Freeman was in the supervisor's chambers for that announcement this morning. Danny?
Jim, 3 months ago, 17 News presented an investigation asking whether Supervisor Leticia Perez had a marijuana conflict of interest due to her husband's work. Today, Supervisor Perez announced she would abstain from future votes on that very issue. It was an announcement few saw coming.
In my own consciousness, my own duty to the public trust, I do not think it is appropriate for me to engage in a vote on this matter moving forward.
District 5 Supervisor Leticia Perez said she would no longer vote on matters related to marijuana in Kern.
For the impressions that have been given to the public that my intentions were ever anything but pure, I am so deeply apologetic and regretful, I don't have words for it.
In February, 17 News first reported Perez's husband, Fernando Jara, was actively involved in consulting and lobbying for marijuana interests in the lead-up to last fall's marijuana vote.
Please cast your votes.
Perez was the lone vote then in favor of allowing a regulated marijuana industry in Kern. In February, Jara declined to be interviewed, but offered the statement, quote, "I'm not involved in the current circus acts being paraded in the media." Perez had not commented publicly on the accusations until Tuesday, when supervisors had to vote to receive a report on prospective marijuana voter initiatives. But her announcement to abstain was not made without taking a parting shot at fellow supervisor Mike Maggard.
I am going to abstain from any future votes on cannabis. I would ask my chairman to please consider the same, in all due humility and respect to him, this body, and the public.
Maggard has been accused by some marijuana advocates of working with local consultants to play favorites with dispensary owners in the event the cannabis industry becomes regulated in Kern. Maggard responded to Perez's comments.
Only those who have a conflict should recuse themselves from doing the people's business. And if she thinks she has a conflict, then that's fine. She should recuse herself. But I'm not going to be bullied or marginalized by the strategy of the marijuana special interests to try to make me not be a participant in this process.
Fernando Jara did not respond to our request for comment today. Meanwhile, the district attorney's office tells 17 News its investigation into these swirling accusations is still pending. Danny Freeman, 17 News.
Breaking news tops our broadcast this hour. County prosecutors are preparing to take action in a months-long investigation involving a sitting Kern County supervisor who has been accused of a conflict of interest. This, according to multiple sources who have talked with 17's Kristen Price and Danny Freeman. The controversy stems from a county marijuana decision and a 17 News investigation which asked if Supervisor Leticia Perez should have cast a vote in that instance. 17's Danny Freeman in our newsroom tonight with the latest. Danny?
Jim, it's not immediately clear what kind of action the district attorney's office plans to take, but options include administrative, civil, or criminal remedies. For nearly 5 months, the district attorney's public integrity unit has been investigating accusations of conflicts of interest involving county supervisors. According to some interviewed, Supervisor Leticia Perez's marijuana vote has been a focus for investigators. On October 24th, Supervisor Perez cast the lone vote to permit the sale of marijuana in the unincorporated areas of Kern County. But Perez's husband, Fernando Jara, was actively involved in consulting and lobbying for marijuana interests in the lead-up to the marijuana vote. The DA's probe began after a 17 News investigation in February asked whether Perez had a marijuana conflict of interest due to her husband's work. Neither Supervisor nor Perez nor Hara returned texts or calls made to them Monday. In a surprise announcement in May, Perez said she would abstain from future votes regarding marijuana.
In my own consciousness, my own duty to the public trust, I do not think it is appropriate for me to engage in a vote on this matter moving forward.
When approached for comment for the 17 News investigation in February, Hara declined to be interviewed, but wrote in a statement, quote, "I'm not involved in the current circus acts being paraded in the media." We reached out to the district attorney's office to see if any action would be taken against Supervisor Leticia Perez. DA Lisa Green declined to comment. Danny Freeman, 17 News.
Topping our newscast this hour, a cannabis controversy comes to a head as 5th District Supervisor Leticia Perez is charged with 2 misdemeanors connected to her vote last October in favor of regulating the marijuana industry in Kern County. Those charges announced this morning by District Attorney Lisa Green, accusing Perez of having a financial conflict of interest linked to that vote. 17's Danny Freeman has been covering the marijuana controversy for many months now, and he joins us live from outside the county administrative building with the latest. Danny?
Jim, this story has been a roller coaster for Supervisor Perez for months, even leading for her to abstain from any future marijuana votes. But with a marijuana misdemeanor on the table now, well, the stakes are higher. Supervisor Leticia Perez was nowhere to be seen Tuesday after criminal charges were announced against her by District Attorney Lisa Green.
As a supervisor of the Board of Supervisors of Kern County, Supervisor Perez participated in making or attempting to use her official position to influence a governmental decision in which she knew or had reason to know she had a financial interest.
That first count specifically relates to Perez's October vote to allow the marijuana industry in Kern's unincorporated parts.
It's a conflict of interest.
While Green would not go into detail, a 17 News investigation in February showed Perez's husband, Fernando Hara, was actively consulting and lobbying for marijuana interests in Kern. The second count alleges Perez failed to disclose investments in the lead-up to the marijuana vote. Here are the forms in question. They're called economic interest forms. In 2017, Perez did not include her husband's consulting firm as an asset, something she did do in her 2018 forms. The 2018 disclosure says Hara's business made between $10,000 and $100,000.
Their case is based upon unreliable, unsubstantiated, and conclusory statements which the defense is prepared to thoroughly discredit.
With Perez and Hara absent, criminal defense attorney H.A. Sala said the supervisor is innocent.
Supervisor Perez has unlawfully been singled out and subjected to disparate and discriminatory treatment.
This is an investigation and charges against the lone Latina woman supervisor on this board. Your response?
My response is the evidence is what led us to these charges. It has nothing to do with political persecution.
Is this grounds for Supervisor Perez to step down?
She's not required to step down. I think that the decision whether to step down is, if she's convicted or at any time, is completely lies within the purview of Supervisor Perez.
Now, Sala was emphatic. Supervisor Perez will not step down in the wake of these accusations. Supervisor Perez is expected to be arraigned tomorrow morning at the Kern County Courthouse, and if convicted of these charges, Supervisor Perez could face up to a year in prison and a temporary ban on running for elected office in the future. Live from outside the county administrative building, Danny Freeman, 17 News.